The wind came down from the peaks like a living thing, carrying ice and the promise of a winter that would break weak men. Caleb Rourke stood at the edge of Ashford Settlement, watching the supply wagon crawl up the mountain road, and felt the familiar weight of silence pressing against his skull. 3 years. 3 years since he'd spoken more than a dozen words in a single day. 3 years since another human voice had echoed off the log walls of his cabin. The trappers who worked these mountains were a solitary breed by necessity, but Caleb had crossed some invisible line between solitude and something darker. The silence had teeth now. It chewed at him during the endless winter nights, left him talking to shadows and answering questions no one had asked. "That's your bride wagon, Rourke?" Old Samuel Chen stood beside the trading post, tobacco-stained teeth visible through his grin. "Heard you sent off for a woman. Desperate times, eh?" Caleb didn't answer. He'd learned that silence could be a shield, though lately it felt more like a cage. "My cousin in Sacramento, he got one of them mail-order brides," Samuel continued, spitting into the dirt. "Pretty little thing from Boston. Of course, she ran off with a mining foreman after 6 months, but still, 6 months of warm beds ain't nothing to sneeze at." The wagon lurched over a rut, close enough now that Caleb could see the driver's face, a narrow man named Hutchins who ran supplies between Ashford and the valley towns below. In the wagon bed, among crates of flour and ammunition and lamp oil, sat a single trunk, and beside it, something that made Caleb's stomach turn cold. A woman, sitting perfectly still, with a burlap sack tied over her head. "Jesus Christ," Samuel breathed. "What in the hell?" The wagon rattled to a stop in front of Jasper's trading post. Hutchins climbed down, slow, like a man who didn't want to be there. Behind him, the settlement was coming alive, doors opening, faces appearing in windows. News traveled fast in a place where nothing ever happened, and this was something. Caleb moved forward, boots crunching on half-frozen mud. Up close, he could see the woman's hands, rope-burned wrists, fingers clasped tight in her lap. She wore a dress that might have been blue once, travel-stained and torn at the hem. The sack over her head was tied with coarse rope, tight enough that the fabric molded to the contours of her face when she breathed. "Mr. Rourke?" Hutchins pulled a folded paper from his coat. Wouldn't meet Caleb's eyes. "Got your delivery here. Need you to sign." "Take that goddamn sack off her head." Caleb's voice came out rough, unused. "Can't do that, sir. Instructions were clear. She's to stay covered until you accept or refuse delivery." Hutchins thrust the paper forward. "There's a letter here, from the agency. Think you better read it." Caleb took the paper. His hands, scarred from traps and knife work and 100 mountain winters, looked too large and clumsy holding something so delicate. The letter was brief. "Mr. Rourke, your payment has been received. However, we must inform you that the woman designated as your bride has been found unfit for standard placement. Physical condition acceptable, but temperament and history render her unsuitable for civilized households. She is offered to you at no refund, as contracted. Agency assumes no responsibility for behavior, performance, or satisfaction. Unfit. No returns. Westward Matrimonial Services." A label was pinned to the woman's collar, the same words written in harsh black ink. Unfit. No returns. Christ Almighty. Samuel had moved closer, along with half a dozen others. News of the bride wagon had spread like wildfire. "They sent you damaged goods, Rourke. You gonna take her back?" "Can't take her back," Hutchins said quickly. "That's the whole point. Contract says no returns. You paid. You get what you get." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Look, I'm just the delivery man. I don't know what she did or why they marked her that way. But the agency was real clear. She's yours if you want her, or she stays here, and that's not my problem." "Let me see her face." Caleb reached for the sack. "Wouldn't do that if I were you." Hutchins stepped back. "Agency said she's got a mouth on her. Troublemaker. That's why the hood keeps her quiet." Something moved through the crowd then, an ugly current. Caleb could feel it. The judgment, the curiosity, the barely concealed hunger that came when men who lived without women suddenly had one in their midst, damaged or not. "What'd she do?" someone called out. "Murder somebody?" "Maybe she's diseased," another voice suggested. That why they covered her up? Or ugly as sin? Laughter rippled through the gathering. Caleb looked at the woman. She hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, but her hands had tightened in her lap, fingers pressing white against the fabric of her dress. Under that sack, she was hearing every word. Knowing she was being discussed like livestock, like something less than human. He thought about the cabin waiting up the mountain. 4 walls of timber and stone, a good roof, a stove that kept the cold at bay. Empty, except for him and the silence. He thought about the winter coming, about the nights that stretched longer every year, about the sound of his own voice becoming foreign to his ears. He thought about what it meant to be unwanted. "I'll take her." The words came out flat, final. Samuel laughed, harsh and disbelieving. "You serious? You don't even know what's under there. Could be anything. Could be a face that'll haunt your dreams." "Could be worse than that," another man added. "Could be she's crazy, violent, that's why they bagged her up." Hutchins thrust forward a second paper. "Sign here. Acknowledges receipt and acceptance. Means she's your responsibility. Anything she does, any trouble she causes, that's on you." Caleb took the pencil, scratched his name across the bottom. His handwriting was rough, unpracticed. The pencil felt strange between his fingers. "Your funeral," Samuel muttered. "Don't come crying to us when she burns your cabin down or cuts your throat in your sleep." "I'll need help getting her trunk to my wagon." Caleb ignored the commentary, moved past Hutchins toward the wagon bed. "That's it? You're just taking her? Just like that?" Hutchins seemed almost disappointed, like he'd been hoping for more drama. "That's it." Caleb's wagon was tied up behind the trading post, a smaller affair than Hutchins' freight hauler, but sturdy enough for the mountain roads. He loaded the trunk himself, ignoring the offers of help that weren't really offers at all, just excuses to get closer, to stare. When he came back for the woman, she was standing. Someone had helped her down from Hutchins' wagon, though they'd kept their distance doing it, like whatever made her unfit might be contagious. "Come on." Caleb kept his voice low, speaking to her for the first time. "Wagon's this way." She moved like someone who'd been sitting too long, stiff and careful. The sack over her head turned toward his voice, and for a moment he wondered what she could see through the burlap. Shadows, maybe. Light and dark. Shapes moving around her. He helped her up into the wagon seat, his hands careful on her arm. Through the fabric of her dress he could feel how thin she was, bird-boned and fragile. Not the sturdy frontier woman he'd imagined when he'd sent his money to the agency. But then, he supposed unwanted things rarely came in the packages you expected. "This is a mistake, Rourke." William Jasper, who owned the trading post, stepped forward. He was a fat man with calculating eyes, the kind who saw profit in every transaction. "You want my advice? Leave her here. I'll send word down to the agency. Get this sorted out. Maybe they'll send you a proper woman." "Don't need your advice." "That label says unfit." Jasper moved closer, lowered his voice like he was sharing something confidential. "You know what that means in these catalogs? Means she's ruined goods. Means no decent household would have her. Could be she's a thief. Could be she's a whore. Could be she's got some disease they don't want spreading through civilized company." Caleb climbed up beside the woman, took the reins. "Could be a lot of things. Could be none of them are your business. It's the settlement's business when you bring trouble into these mountains." Jasper's voice hardened. "We got a peaceful community here. Hardworking folks. Don't need whatever poison that woman's carrying." "Then it's fortunate she'll be up at my cabin, isn't it? 5 miles from your peaceful community." He clicked his tongue, set the horses moving. Behind them, the crowd watched in silence. Caleb could feel their stares like physical weight pressing against his back. By nightfall, the story would be told and retold. The desperate mountain man who accepted damaged goods, who took a hooded woman home like she was something worth having. Let them talk. Talk was all they had up here anyway. The road up to his cabin wound through stands of pine and aspen, following a creek that ran fast with snowmelt even this late in the season. The silence between Caleb and the woman stretched taut, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the sound of wind through the trees. After a mile, he spoke. "I'm going to take that sack off your head." She went rigid beside him. He could see her hands clench in her lap. "Not going to hurt you." he continued, keeping his eyes on the road. But we got another hour of travel, and I figure you can't breathe too well through that burlap. Going to pull the wagon over, remove the hood. You try to run, you won't get far. These mountains don't forgive women traveling alone, but if you sit quiet and don't cause trouble, I won't give you reason to run. Understood? A pause. Then barely audible through the fabric. Understood. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it in a while, but there was something else there too. An edge of wariness, of someone who'd learned not to trust easy words. He pulled the wagon to a stop beside the creek. The water ran loud here, drowning out the silence. Caleb set the brake, turned to face the woman fully for the first time. Going to untie this rope now. He reached for the knot at the base of her skull. His fingers were clumsy with it. Whoever had tied this had meant it to stay tied. Hold still. The rope came free. Caleb pulled the sack upward, gentle as he could manage. The burlap caught on her hair, and she flinched but didn't pull away. Then it was off, and he was looking at a human face for the first time in however long she'd been traveling with that hood on. She wasn't beautiful. Not in the way the agency catalog had promised, no rosy cheeks or delicate features or demure downcast eyes. She was all angles and pallor, with dark hair that had been pinned up but was mostly falling down, tangled and sweat-dampened. Her eyes were gray, or maybe blue. It was hard to tell in the late afternoon light, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to look away. There was a bruise on her left cheek, faded to yellow-green but still visible, and a thin scar running from the corner of her mouth, barely noticeable unless you were looking for damage. "That's better," Caleb said, stuffing the burlap sack under the wagon seat. "Can you breathe all right?" She nodded, didn't speak. Her eyes tracked his movements like someone watching a predator, calculating distance and escape routes. "Name's Caleb Rourke. I suppose you know that already, from the papers." He picked up the reins again, set the wagon moving. "Didn't catch yours." Silence. Then, "Ilara. Ilara." He tested the name, found it strange in his mouth. "Just Ilara?" "Vance. Ilara Vance." She said it like she was trying it out herself, like maybe it was new. Not that names matter much, I suppose. Not for someone marked unfit. There was bitterness in her voice, sharp as broken glass. That label. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "What did you do to earn it? Does it matter?" She turned to look at him fully now, and there was challenge in her gaze. "You signed the papers. I'm yours now, unfit or not, property delivered as described." "You're not property. Tell that to Westward Matrimonial Services." A harsh laugh escaped her. "Tell that to every person in that settlement who looked at me like I was spoiled meat." Caleb didn't have an answer for that. They rode in silence for a while, the road climbing steeper now. The sun was dropping toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. In an hour it would be dark, and the temperature would plummet. He needed to get them home, get a fire going, get food into both of them. "Why'd you take me?" Ilara asked suddenly. "You didn't have to. Could have refused delivery, let them figure out what to do with me." "Could have. But you didn't." She was studying him now, and he felt exposed under that gaze. "Why?" Caleb considered the question, thought about the honest answer, that he'd been dying slowly up here, that the silence had started to feel like drowning, that he'd sent for a bride out of desperation rather than desire. Thought about saying he didn't know, which was partly true. Thought about deflecting, changing the subject. Instead, he said, "Figured we both might be desperate enough to make something work." Ilara laughed again, but this time it sounded different. Less bitter, more surprised. "Honest. Didn't expect that. Don't see much point in lying. We're going to be living together. Might as well start with truth." "Truth." She turned the word over like an unfamiliar coin. "All right then. Truth. I'm marked unfit because I ran away from a man who thought he owned me. I took money with me. Money that was mine by right, but he called it theft. The agency found out, branded me a thief and a troublemaker. Nobody wanted a woman with that reputation, so they slapped a hood on me and sent me to the first fool who'd paid up front and couldn't get a refund." She said it all in a rush, like pulling off a bandage. When she finished, she sat back and waited, jaw set like she expected judgment. Caleb processed this information slowly. This man who thought he owned you. He have a name? Does it matter? Might, if he comes looking. He won't. But something flickered in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or uncertainty. He's got no reason to look in these mountains. But he might anyway. Alara didn't answer. That was answer enough. They crested a ridge and the cabin came into view, a solid structure of logs and stone, set in a clearing with the mountain rising behind it and the valley dropping away in front. Smoke should have been rising from the chimney, but the place looked cold and empty. It was a lonely sight, Caleb realized, seeing it through strangers' eyes. A lonely place for a lonely man. This is it? Alara's voice was carefully neutral. This is it. He guided the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin. One room, loft for sleeping. Stove, table, couple chairs. Barn out back for the horses and the mule. Creek runs close enough for water. It's not much, but it's solid. Warm in winter, cool in summer. Private. Private. She repeated the word like it meant something specific. I suppose that's worth something. Caleb climbed down, offered his hand to help her. She hesitated before taking it, a brief pause that spoke volumes about trust. Her hand was cold in his, thin-boned and calloused in unexpected places. Not soft hands, working hands. I'll get a fire going, he said, releasing her hand quickly. You want to come inside or wait out here while I unload? Inside. She moved toward the door without waiting for him, and he noticed the way she walked, quick and efficient, like someone used to moving with purpose, like someone who'd learned that hesitation could cost you. The cabin interior was dim, smelling of cold ash and pine, and the particular mustiness of a place left empty too long. Caleb had been gone 2 days, down to the settlement and back. In that time, the cold had crept in, settling into the corners like an unwelcome guest. Alara stood in the center of the room, taking inventory. Her gaze moved over the sparse furniture, table, chairs, a chest against one wall, shelves holding supplies. The stove dominated one corner, cold and waiting. A ladder led up to the loft where he slept. One room, she said quietly. I can sleep in the barn if you... No, she cut him off. That's foolish. Winter's coming. Man can't sleep in a barn when there's a loft. She turned to face him. We're both adults. We can figure out how to share space without... She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. All right then. Caleb moved to the stove, began building a fire. The routine was familiar, comforting. Kindling first, then larger pieces, coaxing flame from tinder. I'll bring in your trunk. Get the horses settled. There's a pot on the shelf there. Creek water's clean if you want to start something for dinner. Supplies are in the chest. Flour, beans, salt pork. Help yourself. He didn't wait for an answer, just headed back outside. The evening air bit cold against his face, clean and sharp after the closeness of the cabin. He could hear Alara moving around inside, the sound of her presence strange and unsettling in a space that had been his alone for so long. The horses needed tending first. He unhitched them, led them to the barn, removed their tack and rubbed them down. The work was mindless, giving his thoughts room to wander. What had he done? Brought a strange woman to his cabin, a woman marked unfit, a woman running from something she wouldn't name, a woman who might be everything Jasper and the others had warned about, thief, troublemaker, danger. Or she might just be desperate, like him. By the time he hauled her trunk inside, full dark had fallen. The cabin glowed with firelight now, and something was cooking, actual food, not the half-burnt attempts he usually managed. Alara stood at the stove, stirring a pot that smelled of salt pork and beans, and something else he couldn't identify. Found some wild onions out back, she said without turning around. And you had carrots going to soft in that chest. Should have used them sooner. Didn't know how. The admission came easier than he expected. Not much of a cook. I noticed. She nodded toward the stove. This thing's got a hot spot on the left side. You've been burning everything you try to make, I'd wager. How'd you know that? Scrape marks on the bottom of the pan. Carbon buildup. And you've got the look of a man who eats because he has to, not because he wants to. She finally turned to face him, wooden spoon in hand. I can teach you. Cooking, I mean. If you want to learn. It was such a normal offer, such an ordinary thing, that it almost hurt. When was the last time someone had offered to teach him something, to share knowledge, to make his life easier? I'd appreciate that, he said. They ate at the table, plates of beans and pork and vegetables that tasted better than anything Caleb had managed in months. Elara ate efficiently, mechanically, like someone who'd learned not to waste food. Between bites, she asked questions. Practical things about the cabin, the winter, supplies, routines. You trap? She asked. Some. Mostly I hunt, trade meat, and hides down at the settlement for what I can't make myself. Profitable? Enough. He wiped his plate with a piece of bread. I don't need much. But you needed a wife. It wasn't quite a question. Thought I did. He met her eyes across the table. Thought I was going crazy up here alone. Silence gets loud after a while. Elara nodded slowly, like this made sense to her. And now? Now I've got you. He said it simply, a statement of fact. Don't know if that makes things better or worse yet. Honest again. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, though it didn't reach her eyes. I can't promise to make things better, Mr. Rourke. Can't promise to be what you paid for. That agency was right about one thing. I'm not fit for this. Not fit for marriage. Not fit for domesticity. Not fit for playing the grateful bride. What are you fit for then? The question seemed to surprise her. She sat back, considering. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters. The fire crackled in the stove. Surviving, she said finally. That's what I'm good at. Surviving when I shouldn't. Getting through when there's no good way forward. She paused. And running. I'm very good at running. Don't need you to run. Caleb stood, began clearing the plates. Need someone to help me get through winter. Someone to talk to. Someone to make sure I don't disappear into the silence completely. That's all? He could hear the skepticism in her voice, the disbelief that a man would bring a woman all the way up here just for conversation and shared labor. That's all, he confirmed. Anything else? If there's ever anything else, it'll be because we both want it. Not because some contract says you owe me. Laura studied him in the firelight, and he had the sense of being measured, weighed, judged. Finally, she nodded. All right then, Mr. Rourke. We'll try surviving together. See how long we last before one of us goes crazy or the silence wins. Call me Caleb. Caleb. She tested the name, stood, and moved to help with the dishes. And you can drop the Miss Vance before you even start. It's Elara, just Elara. They worked together in companionable quiet, washing and drying and putting away. Outside, the darkness was complete now, the kind of mountain darkness that pressed against windows like a physical thing. Inside, the fire burned warm, pushing back the cold. Later, when Elara climbed the ladder to the loft, Caleb stayed below, stoking the fire one last time before settling into his chair. He could hear her moving around up there, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of fabric as she prepared for sleep. Strange sounds in a space that had been silent so long. He thought about the label pinned to her collar, unfit, no returns. He thought about the choice he'd made in front of the whole settlement, taking her despite the warnings. He thought about the winter coming, about the long dark months ahead when they'd be trapped here together, two broken people trying to survive the cold. Tomorrow, the talk would start in earnest. Tomorrow, Jasper and Samuel and the rest would have their theories and their judgments. Tomorrow, he'd have to face what he'd brought into his life. But tonight there was warmth and the smell of cooking and the sound of another person breathing in the darkness above him. Tonight, for the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't have teeth. It was enough. The first snow came 6 days after Elara arrived, falling soft and silent through the night. Caleb woke to a world transformed, the clearing buried under 6 inches of white, the trees bent heavy with it, the sky that peculiar gray that promised more to come. Winter had announced itself early this year, sealing them in. He dressed quietly, trying not to wake Elara in the loft above. The cabin was cold despite the banked fire, his breath visible in the dim morning light. As he reached for his boots, her voice drifted down. It snowed. Not a question, a statement of fact, flat and resigned. First of the season, he confirmed, pulling on his coat. Probably won't be the last. He heard her moving around up there, the creak of boards, then her feet appearing on the ladder. She climbed down wearing the same dress from yesterday. She only had two, he'd discovered, plus whatever was in that trunk she kept padlocked. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, dark and tangled from sleep. "How bad?" she asked. 6 inches, maybe. Not terrible, but it'll stick now. Ground's cold enough." Alara moved to the window, pressed her hand against the cold glass. Her reflection stared back at her, ghostly in the morning light. "I've never seen snow before. Not real snow. Not like this." The admission surprised him. "Where'd you come from?" "South, far south." She didn't elaborate, didn't turn from the window. Down there, winter meant rain. Cold rain sometimes, but never snow. Caleb started building up the fire, adding split logs to the coals. "Well, you'll see plenty of it now. We're locked in here until spring, more or less. Can get down to the settlement in decent weather, but some weeks we won't be able to travel at all." Locked in. She repeated the words, and something flickered across her face. Panic, maybe, or claustrophobia. Then it was gone, replaced by that careful blankness she wore like armor. "How much food do we have?" "Enough. I stock up in fall. Flour, beans, salt pork, dried corn. Got 2 deer hanging in the cold shed, smoked and salted. Some root vegetables in the cellar. We won't starve. But we might get sick of beans." "We'll definitely get sick of beans." He allowed himself a small smile. "But we'll survive." They fell into a routine over the following days, awkward at first, then gradually easier. Caleb would wake early, build the fire, tend the animals. Alara would make breakfast. Actual breakfast, not the half-burned attempts he usually managed, and they'd eat together in the gray morning light. Then the day's work would begin. There was always work. Wood to split and stack, snow to clear from the paths to the barn and the outhouse, traps to check along the tree line, repairs to make before the deep cold set in. Caleb had been managing it alone, but with 2 sets of hands, the burden lightened. Alara proved capable in ways the agency catalog had never mentioned. She could split kindling without supervision, haul water from the creek without complaint, muck out the barn without flinching from the smell. She moved through tasks with grim efficiency, like someone who'd learned early that survival meant work. "You grow up on a farm?" Caleb asked one afternoon. They were in the barn, forking hay down from the loft for the horses. "Something like that." Alara's answer was evasive, as usual. She deflected personal questions like they were physical blows. "Worked on one, anyway. Long time ago. Before you ended up with this man who thought he owned you." She paused mid-motion, pitchfork suspended. "Are we doing this now? Trading life stories?" "Just making conversation." "Conversation?" She laughed, sharp and bitter. "You know what your problem is, Caleb? You're too curious for a man who spent 3 years hiding from the world." "I wasn't hiding." "No? What do you call it then?" She drove the pitchfork into the hay bale with more force than necessary. 3 years alone in these mountains, barely speaking to anyone, sending away for a wife because you'd rather have a stranger than go down to the settlement and actually meet people. That's not hiding. The accusation stung because it was true. Caleb climbed down from the loft, brushed hay from his sleeves. "All right, fair enough. I was hiding." "From what?" "I don't even know anymore. Just seemed easier to be alone." "And was it? Easier?" He thought about the silence, about the way it had started to swallow him. No. Turned out it wasn't. Alara studied him, her expression softer now. "We're a pair, aren't we? The hiding man and the running woman, both too broken to fit anywhere normal. Maybe that's why this works." He said it carefully, testing the waters. 2 broken people making something that doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be enough. She didn't answer, but something in her face shifted, the armor thinning just for a moment. Then she turned back to the hay. "We should finish this. More snow coming tonight, by the look of those clouds." She was right. The snow came hard that night, driven by wind that howled down from the peaks like a living thing. Caleb lay in his chair by the fire, listening to it batter the shutters, and tried not to think about how small they were against the mountain's fury. Above him, in the loft, he could hear Alara tossing restlessly. "Can't sleep?" he called up. A pause. Then, "Wind's loud. It'll blow itself out by morning. Is it always like this?" He heard the edge of fear in her voice, carefully controlled but there nonetheless. "Sometimes. Winter storms can be brutal up here, but the cabin's solid. We're safe. Safe. She said the word like she was trying to believe it. Nothing's ever really safe, though, is it? Caleb didn't have an answer for that. After a while, he heard her settle, her breathing evening out into something like sleep. He stayed awake longer, feeding the fire, listening to the storm rage outside their small circle of warmth. By the second week, they'd established a rhythm that almost felt natural. Mornings for outside work, checking traps, splitting wood, maintaining the paths through the deepening snow. Afternoons for inside tasks, repairs, cooking, the endless small maintenance that kept a cabin livable. Evenings for quiet, sitting by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes not. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Alara finally opened up, just a crack. His name was Marcus Devereaux. She spoke to the fire, not to Caleb. The man I ran from, he owned a shipping company in New Orleans, import and export, legal mostly, though he had his fingers in things that weren't so legal too. Caleb set down the trap he'd been repairing, gave her his full attention. She'd never volunteered information about her past before. I worked in his household, started as a maid, worked my way up to managing the entire staff. I was good at it, efficient. He noticed. Her voice went flat. He noticed and decided he wanted more than just efficiency. He forced himself on you. No. The word came quick, defensive. Not exactly. He was clever about it, made it seem like a choice, offered me a better position, better pay, better quarters. All I had to do was be available when he wanted, and She stopped, swallowed hard. I was practical. I took the deal. Thought I could manage it, keep it transactional, just business. But it wasn't. It was never just business, not to him. Alara's hands were clenched in her lap, white-knuckled. He got possessive, started calling me his woman, bought me clothes, jewelry, kept me like a pet, and I let him, because the alternative was going back to scrubbing floors for pennies. Caleb waited, letting the silence stretch. Outside, wind whistled through the eaves. Then he started talking about making it official. Marriage, said he'd make me respectable, give me his name, like that was some kind of gift. She laughed, harsh and bitter. What he meant was he wanted to own me legally, put a ring on me and lock me in place permanently. So you ran. So I ran. Took money from his safe. Money he owed me for 3 years of wages he'd never actually paid, just promised. Took jewelry he'd given me, things he said were mine. Sold it all, got as far as I could before he realized I was gone. She finally turned to look at Caleb. The agency found out somehow. Maybe he contacted them. Maybe they just did their research. Either way, they branded me a thief and marked me unfit. No returns. You weren't a thief. You took what was yours. Tell that to Marcus Devereaux. Tell that to the law. She turned back to the fire. Down there, I'm a criminal. Up here, I'm just unfit. I guess that's progress. Caleb considered his next words carefully. This Devereaux, you said he wouldn't come looking, but you're not sure, are you? Alara's silence was answer enough. If he comes, he won't. But her voice lacked conviction. He has no reason to look in these mountains. No reason to think I'd come this far north. But if he does... She met his eyes then, and there was steel in her gaze. If he does, I'll handle it. I'm not your problem, Caleb. I'm not your responsibility beyond what that contract says. If trouble comes because of me, I'll deal with it. That's not how this works. That's exactly how this works. You didn't sign up for my past. You signed up for a mail-order bride, not someone else's mess. I signed up for you. The words came out more forceful than he intended. Whatever that means. Whatever you brought with you. You're here now. That makes it my concern too. Alara stared at him, something unreadable in her expression. Finally she said, You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. That got a real smile from her, small but genuine. Probably both, she agreed. The conversation shifted after that, moved to safer topics, how to preserve meat through winter, which traps worked best for different animals, the quirks of the cabin's construction. But something had changed between them. The wall Alara kept around herself had developed a crack, and through it, Caleb could see the person underneath, scared, scarred, but fighting. 2 weeks became 3. The snow kept falling, each storm adding another layer to the white world outside their windows. The settlement might as well have been on another continent for all they could reach it. They were alone now, truly alone, with only each other and the mountains for company. Caleb found himself watching Alara when she wasn't looking. The way she moved through the cabin like she was mapping escape routes, even though there was nowhere to escape to. The way her hand would sometimes drift to her ribs, pressing gently against some hidden pain. The way she'd flinch at sudden noises, then catch herself and force her body to stillness. "How'd you get that scar?" he asked one morning. They were sitting at the table eating breakfast in the gray dawn light. He nodded toward the thin line at the corner of her mouth. Alara's hand rose automatically to touch it, then dropped. "Kitchen knife. Long time ago." "Accident?" "No." She didn't elaborate. Caleb didn't push. He was learning to read her silences, to understand which questions had answers and which had only doors she wasn't ready to open. But later that day, while they were sorting through supplies in the cellar, she spoke again. "I was 16, working in a boarding house kitchen. The owner's son, he had ideas about me. Thought because I was poor and alone, he could take what he wanted." She moved jars around on the shelf, not looking at Caleb. "He was wrong. I had a paring knife. Left him with a matching scar, though his was considerably lower." "Good for you." "He didn't think so. Neither did his father. I got thrown out. No pay, no reference. And this," she touched the scar. "His father gave me this before I left. Said it would remind me what happened to girls who got above themselves." Caleb felt anger kindle in his chest, hot and sudden. "You were defending yourself." "Didn't matter. Down there, in that world, girls like me didn't get to defend themselves. We were supposed to take what came and be grateful for the opportunity." She turned to face him, eyes hard. "That's what made me unfit, Caleb, not what I did to Marcus Devereaux. What made me unfit was learning over and over that I didn't have to accept what they tried to do to me, that I could fight back, could run, could refuse. That doesn't make you unfit. It makes me unmarketable, makes me difficult. Makes me the kind of woman no respectable household wants." She climbed the cellar stairs, arms full of jars, which is how I ended up here, with a sack over my head and a label pinned to my collar. That night, Caleb gave her his coat. They'd been in the barn, feeding the animals before bed, when he noticed her shivering. The dress she wore was too thin for mountain winter, and she only had one shawl. She hadn't complained, but he could see her hands were red and raw with cold. "Here." He shrugged off his heavy wool coat, held it out. "Take it. That's your coat. I've got another inside. Take it." Alara stared at the offered coat like it might bite her. "Why?" "Because you're cold." "That's not what I mean." She looked up at him, confused and wary. "Why are you being kind to me? What do you want?" The question hit him harder than it should have. "I don't want anything, Alara." "Everyone wants something. Every kindness has a price." "Not this one." She searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap, the hidden expectation. Finally, slowly, she took the coat, put it on. It swallowed her, too large in the shoulders, the sleeves hanging past her hands. She looked young suddenly, vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome." They walked back to the cabin through the snow, and Caleb tried not to think about what kind of life taught a person that kindness always had a price. A month in, and the isolation was starting to show its teeth, not in big ways, but in small ones. The way Alara would stand at the window for long stretches, staring out at the endless white. The way Caleb would catch himself talking too much, pouring out words like he was afraid the silence would reclaim him if he stopped. The way they'd both startled when a branch broke under snow weight, the sound like a gunshot in the stillness. "Tell me about your family," Alara said one evening. They were sitting by the fire, Caleb working on a leather harness that needed mending, Alara doing something with needle and thread to one of her dresses. "Not much to tell. Parents died when I was young. Fever took them both in the same winter. Got passed around to relatives who didn't want another mouth to feed. Took off on my own as soon as I was old enough. Brothers? Sisters? Had a brother. Older. He died in the war." "I'm sorry," Caleb shrugged, uncomfortable with sympathy. "It was a long time ago. Different life." Is that when you came to the mountains? After he died? Few years after, tried settling in Kansas for a while, working freight, didn't take. Too many people, too much noise. Mountains seemed cleaner somehow, more honest. Honest? Alara considered this. I suppose they are. They don't pretend to be anything but what they are. Brutal, beautiful, indifferent. What about you? Any family? No. The word was flat, final. No one. Something in her tone warned him not to push, so he didn't. They sat in silence, working on their respective tasks, the fire crackling between them. Then Alara said, so quietly, he almost missed it. There was a daughter. Caleb's hand stilled on the harness. He didn't look up, didn't move, afraid that any reaction would make her stop talking. I was 17, worked in a textile mill. There was a foreman, She stopped, swallowed. It doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is I got pregnant, lost my job, obviously, spent everything I had saved on a room in a boarding house, worked when I could, but by the time she was born, I had nothing left. What happened to her? I gave her up to a couple who wanted children, who had money, who could give her things I never could. They took her when she was 3 days old. Alara's hands had stopped sewing, the needle frozen mid-stitch. I held her for 3 days. That's all I got. 3 days. Alara, don't. She cut him off, voice sharp. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say it was for the best. Don't say any of the things people always say. I know it was practical. I know she's better off. I know I made the right choice. That doesn't make it hurt less. Caleb set down the harness, moved to sit on the floor near her chair. Not touching, just close. I wasn't going to say any of that. No? She looked down at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. What were you going to say? That you survived something that should have broken you, and that you're still here, still fighting. That takes strength most people don't have. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm held together with spit and hope, and any moment now I'm going to fall apart completely. Then fall apart. You're allowed. Am I? Her laugh was watery, desperate. Because it seems like I have to keep being strong, keep surviving, keep running. I don't get to fall apart. You're not running anymore. You're here. You're safe. Safe. She shook her head. There's that word again. When do I get to believe it? Caleb didn't have an answer, so instead he did something he'd never done before. He reached out and took her hand, just held it, his rough, scarred fingers wrapping around her cold ones. Alara stared at their joined hands like she didn't understand what she was seeing. Then, slowly, her fingers tightened around his. They sat like that for a long time, the fire burning low, the snow falling silent outside. Two broken people holding on to each other in the darkness. Morning brought a thaw, brief and deceptive. The temperature rose just enough to turn the top layer of snow to slush, making everything wet and miserable. Caleb went out to check the traps, came back empty-handed and frustrated. The animals were bedded down deep, waiting out the weather. We're low on fresh meat, he said, stomping snow off his boots. Might have to break into the second deer sooner than I wanted. Alara looked up from the stove where she was making something that smelled surprisingly good. How low are we on other supplies? Flour's holding, beans and corn too, but we're nearly out of coffee and the sugar's gone. Can we get to the settlement? Not in this weather. Road'll be a mess with the melt. Give it a few days, let it freeze solid again, then maybe. She nodded, turned back to her cooking, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the spoon too tight. Being trapped was weighing on her more than she let on. Hey! He moved closer, kept his voice gentle. We're all right. We've got enough. I know, it's just... She stopped, shook her head. Nothing. I'm being foolish. You're worried about something. What is it? Alara was quiet for a long moment. Then, what if someone comes while we're stuck up here? What if... She couldn't finish the thought. You mean Devereaux? I mean anyone. The law, the agency, someone looking for the woman who ran. We'd have no warning, no way to get away. Then we deal with it. Caleb said it firmly, with more confidence than he felt. Together. She turned to look at him, searching his face. You keep saying that. Together. Like it's that simple. Maybe it is. Nothing's ever simple. No, he agreed, but that doesn't mean we have to make it complicated. Elara opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a sound cut through the morning, the distant crack of a gunshot, echoing off the mountain slopes. They both froze. That came from the settlement, Caleb said slowly, or near it. Another shot, then silence. Elara's face had gone pale. What does that mean? Could be anything. Hunting, trouble. Could be nothing at all. But his hand had moved unconsciously to where his rifle leaned against the wall. Probably nothing. You don't believe that? No. He met her eyes. I don't. They spent the rest of the day in tense awareness, jumping at every sound, watching the tree line for movement that never came. By evening, when nothing had happened, they'd almost convinced themselves it was paranoia. Almost. That night, lying in the darkness, Caleb heard Elara's voice drift down from the loft. Caleb? Yeah? If something happens, if someone comes, you don't have to protect me. I can run. I'm good at it. He sat up in his chair, looked toward the loft even though he couldn't see her in the darkness. I know you can run, but you don't have to, not anymore. Everyone has to run eventually. Not everyone, not if they've got someone standing with them. Silence. Then, so quiet he barely heard it. Thank you. He settled back, pulled his blanket tighter. Outside, the wind was picking up again. Another storm rolling in. They'd be snowed in for days, maybe longer. Just him and Elara and whatever ghost she'd brought with her from the south. But for tonight, in this moment, they were safe, warm, together. It would have to be enough. The storm that had been threatening finally broke 3 days later, bringing wind that screamed like something alive and snow so thick Caleb couldn't see the barn from the cabin door. They spent those days trapped inside, the world shrinking to 4 log walls and the circle of warmth around the stove. Elara grew restless in ways that worried him. She'd pace the cabin length, back and forth, her fingers drumming against her thighs. She'd stand at the window for hours, staring into the white nothing. At night, he'd hear her moving in the loft, the boards creaking under her weight as she walked circuits in the darkness. You're going to wear a groove in the floor, Caleb said on the 3rd morning. He was at the table, trying to repair a broken axe handle, but his attention kept drifting to her endless pacing. I can't just sit. Her voice was tight, strained. I need to move. Need to... She stopped mid-stride, pressed her palms against her temples. I feel like the walls are closing in. Come here. He pushed back from the table. Sit down before you make yourself sick. I'm not sick. I'm trapped. We're both trapped. That's what winter in the mountains means. But you pacing yourself into exhaustion isn't going to change the weather. Elara turned on him, eyes blazing. You don't understand. You chose this. You chose isolation, chose to hide up here where nobody could reach you. I didn't choose this. I ran because I had to, and now I'm locked in a box with nowhere to go, and I can't. Her voice cracked. I can't breathe. Caleb stood slowly, moved toward her carefully like approaching a spooked animal. Look at me. She wouldn't. Her gaze stayed fixed on the window, on the storm outside. Elara, look at me. Finally she did. Her eyes were wild, panicked, the careful control she usually maintained stripped away by days of confinement. You can breathe, he said quietly. You're safe. Nothing's coming for you through that storm. Nothing can reach us here. You don't know that. I do know that. No horse can travel in this weather. No man would be fool enough to try. We're cut off. Which means you're cut off too. Protected. Or trapped. Both. He admitted it honestly. It's both. But trapped with enough food and warmth and time to figure out what comes next. She looked at him for a long moment, chest heaving like she'd been running. Then, slowly the panic receded from her eyes. Not gone, just controlled again, shoved down deep where she kept all the things that scared her. I'm sorry, she said finally. I don't do well with confinement. I noticed. It's just that the last time I was trapped somewhere, unable to leave. She stopped, shook her head. Doesn't matter. But it did matter, and they both knew it. Caleb could read it in the set of her shoulders, the way her hands had curled into fists. Wherever she'd been, whatever had been done to her while she couldn't escape, it had left marks that went deeper than the scar on her face. "You want to talk about it?" he offered. "No." "All right then." He moved back to the table, picked up the axe handle. "But we need to find something to keep you occupied, or you're going to wear yourself down to nothing before this storm breaks." Alara was quiet for a moment, then, "Teach me something." "Teach you what?" "Anything, something useful. You said you'd teach me about surviving up here, so teach me." Caleb considered this. "Can you shoot?" "No." "Want to learn?" She looked at him like he'd offered her something precious. "Yes." The rifle couldn't be fired inside, obviously, but he could teach her the mechanics. How to load and unload, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull the trigger. They spent the afternoon on it, Caleb's hands guiding hers, showing her the feel of the weapon, the weight of it. "It's heavier than I expected," Alara said, struggling to hold the rifle steady. "That's good. Means it's solid, well made. Light rifle means light shot, and up here you need stopping power." He adjusted her grip. "Keep your elbows in. Distribute the weight. You're fighting it instead of working with it." She tried again, and this time her stance was better. She sighted down the barrel at an imaginary target, her breathing evening out as she concentrated. "Good," Caleb said. "That's good. Now squeeze. Don't pull. Squeeze. And hold your breath at the bottom of the exhale." The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. Alara lowered the rifle, a small smile playing at her lips. "I like this. Makes me feel less helpless." "You were never helpless." "I felt helpless. That's worse sometimes." She ran her hand along the rifle's stock. "When can we shoot for real?" "When the storm breaks. I'll set up targets, teach you properly." "I'm going to hold you to that." They spent the rest of the day on other lessons. How to read weather signs in the clouds, how to tell fresh animal tracks from old ones, how to start a fire with damp wood. Alara absorbed everything with fierce concentration, like she was storing up knowledge against some future need. That night, the storm finally exhausted itself. The wind died to whispers, and the snow stopped falling. In the sudden quiet, they could hear the creek running under its ice coating, the distant crack of branches breaking under snow weight. "It's over," Alara said from the window. "This one is. But there'll be more." Caleb was banking the fire for the night. "Always more storms." She turned to face him, leaning against the window frame. The lamplight caught her profile, softened the hard edges she usually carried. "Caleb, why did you really send for a bride?" The question caught him off guard. They'd danced around it before, but she'd never asked directly. "Told you, I was going crazy with the silence." "But why a wife? Why not just go down to the settlement more, talk to people there?" He set down the poker, straightened. "Because talking to people at the trading post isn't the same as having someone here, having a voice in the darkness, someone to—" He struggled for the words. "My brother, before he died, he told me the worst part of war wasn't the fighting. It was the silence after. When the gun stopped and there was nothing but your own thoughts, your own fear. Said a man could drown in that silence if he wasn't careful." "And you were drowning." "I was drowning." The admission cost him something. Thought if I had someone here, someone to share the space with, maybe I could find my way back to being human instead of just surviving. Alara crossed her arms, considering. "And has it worked? Having me here?" Caleb met her eyes. "Yeah, it's worked. Even though I'm unfit, even though I'm not what you paid for. You're exactly what I needed. Just didn't know it when I sent that money." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or something deeper. She opened her mouth to respond, but whatever she was going to say was lost as a sound cut through the night. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast. They both froze, listening. The sound grew louder, closer, then stopped somewhere near the cabin. Voices carried through the cold air, men's voices, harsh and commanding. "Stay here." Caleb grabbed his rifle, checked the load. His heart was hammering, but his hand stayed steady. "Get away from the window." "Caleb, do it." She moved into the shadows as he approached the door. Through a gap in the shutters, he could see them. 4 riders, maybe 5. their horses blowing steam in the freezing air. They wore heavy coats, had rifles slung across their saddles. One of them was dismounting, walking toward the cabin with the confidence of someone who expected to be obeyed. The knock came hard and official. "Caleb Rourke, open up. We need to talk to you." Caleb recognized the voice. Thomas Brennan, who served as the settlement's constable when they bothered to have one. A reasonable man usually, but right now he sounded all business. "What's this about, Brennan?" Caleb called through the door. "Need to talk to you about your woman, the one you brought up from the valley. Open the door, Rourke. This doesn't have to be difficult." Behind him, Caleb heard Alara's sharp intake of breath. He glanced back, saw her pressed against the far wall, face white as the snow outside. "What's your business with her?" Caleb asked. "Official business. Now open this door, or we'll open it for you." Caleb looked at Alara. She was shaking her head frantically, terror written across her face. But there was nowhere to run. Not in this weather, not with armed men already at the door. He made his choice. "Guns loaded," he said quietly to Alara. "You know how to use it now. If this goes wrong, you aim for center mass and you don't hesitate. Understood? Don't open that door. Have to, but I'm not letting them take you without answers." He lifted the latch. "Whatever happens, you stay back. Let me handle this." The door swung open, letting in a blast of cold air and 5 men. Brennan was in front, looking uncomfortable but determined. Behind him stood Deputy Morrison, old Samuel Chen from the trading post, William Jasper, and a 5th man Caleb didn't recognize. Younger, well-dressed despite the travel, with cold eyes that swept the cabin until they landed on Alara. "That her?" the stranger asked. "That's her," Jasper confirmed, satisfaction in his voice. "Told you she was up here." Brennan stepped forward, hat in hand. "Mr. Rourke, I apologize for the intrusion, but we've received serious allegations regarding your—" He hesitated over the word, "your wife. Need to ask her some questions." "What kind of allegations? Theft? Forgery? Possible fraud?" Brennan pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Got a warrant here signed by Judge Hawkins down in Cedar Valley. Authorizes us to bring her in for questioning." "Questioning about what?" Caleb's hand stayed on his rifle, not pointing it at anyone, but not setting it down either. The stranger spoke up. "About money she stole from her employer. About documents she forged to cover her tracks. About a pattern of deception that stretches back years." He smiled, thin and cold. "My name is Edward Garvey. I'm an attorney representing Mr. Marcus Devereaux of New Orleans, and that woman behind you is a thief and a liar." Alara's voice cut through the tension, sharp as broken glass. "And you're a lapdog who does whatever Marcus tells you, no matter how illegal." Garvey's smile didn't waver. "I notice you're not denying the charges. I'm not dignifying them with a response. Miss Vance, or is it Mrs. Rourke now? You don't have the luxury of silence. We have evidence. Bank records showing withdrawals you weren't authorized to make. Witness statements. Your own letters discussing the theft." He pulled more papers from inside his coat. "You can come willingly, or we can make this unpleasant. Your choice." Caleb stepped between Garvey and Alara, his rifle coming up slightly. "Nobody's taking anyone anywhere until I see those papers." "Rourke, don't make this harder than it has to be," Brennan said. There was warning in his voice, but also something like sympathy. "I know she's your woman, but if she's committed crimes, if she has, then let's see the evidence. Let's see this warrant you're waving around." Caleb held out his hand. "And let's do this properly, not like a lynch mob." Brennan hesitated, then handed over the warrant. Caleb scanned it quickly, his limited reading skills struggling with the legal language. But he caught enough. Words like theft, fraud, seizure of assets, and most importantly, the judge's seal at the bottom. It looked official. Too official. "This warrant," Caleb said slowly, "it's for questioning, not arrest. Says right here. To be questioned regarding alleged crimes. Doesn't say you can take her forcibly." "Semantics," Garvey waved his hand dismissively. "She'll be questioned down in Cedar Valley, where there are proper facilities. Or you can question her here, where she doesn't have to travel in winter conditions that could kill her." Caleb held the lawyer's gaze. "You want answers? Ask your questions. But she's not leaving this cabin unless she chooses to." "Rourke," Brennan started. "I'm within my rights." Caleb stood his ground. "Warrant says questioning. We'll do questioning. but on my property, where I can make sure it's done fairly." Jasper laughed, harsh and ugly. "Fairly? She's a thief and a whore, Rourke. What fairness does she deserve?" "More than you've ever shown anyone." Caleb's voice dropped dangerously low. "Watch your mouth, Jasper, or I'll watch it for you." "Gentlemen," Garvey's voice cut through the rising tension, "this doesn't need to become violent. Mr. Rourke is correct. The warrant does specify questioning. Very well. We'll conduct our interview here if Miss Vance is willing to cooperate." All eyes turned to Alara. She was still pressed against the wall, but some of the terror had left her face. In its place was something harder, more calculating. "I'll answer your questions," she said, "on one condition." "You're not in a position to make conditions," Garvey replied. "I'm in exactly the position to make conditions. You came all this way in the dead of winter because you need something from me. So here's my condition. I answer your questions honestly, and in return you tell me exactly what Marcus Devereaux wants." "He wants his money back." "No." Alara shook her head. "He wants something more than money. Money he has plenty of. So what is it? What's so important that he'd send a lawyer and hired guns into the mountains in winter?" Garvey's expression flickered just for a moment, and Caleb caught it. Uncertainty, maybe even concern. This woman wasn't acting like a scared runaway. She was acting like someone who had leverage. "Fine," Garvey said finally. "You want honesty? Mr. Devereaux wants his reputation protected, wants assurance that certain information won't become public, information you may or may not have in your possession." "Documents, you mean?" "If such documents exist." Alara smiled then, cold and knowing. "Oh, they exist. I made very sure of that before I left." The cabin went quiet. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. "You're admitting to theft of private documents?" Garvey leaned forward, scenting victory. "I'm admitting to keeping copies of business records that showed systematic fraud, embezzlement, and illegal trading practices. Records that Marcus Devereaux would very much like to remain private." Alara's voice was steady now, the fear burned away by something fiercer. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not the money I supposedly stole, money that was my wages, by the way, earned over 3 years of unpaid labor. It's about those documents." "Where are they?" Garvey demanded. "Safe, far from here, with instructions that if anything happens to me, they go straight to the federal marshal's office in Sacramento." Caleb watched the men's faces, saw the way this information landed. Morrison and Brennan looked confused, like they'd stepped into something bigger than they'd expected. Samuel Chen had gone pale. Jasper just looked angry, but then Jasper always looked angry. Garvey had gone very still. "You're bluffing," he said. "Am I?" Alara pushed off the wall, moved to stand beside Caleb. "You want to take that chance? Want to risk those documents going public because you pushed too hard? You could be lying. Those documents could be fabrications." "They could be. But are you willing to bet Marcus Devereaux's entire business empire on it?" She crossed her arms. "Because I'm not bluffing about what's in them. Bank transfers to Confederate sympathizers during the war. Goods sold to both sides for triple markup. Bribes paid to customs officials, harbor masters, judges. 3 years of detailed records, all in Marcus's own hand or countersigned by him. His signature on every damning page." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Jasper had nothing to say. Finally, Brennan spoke. "Miss Vance, or Mrs. Rourke, are you saying this entire warrant is based on false charges?" "I'm saying the charges of theft are false. The money was mine. The documents are insurance." She looked at Garvey. "And I'm saying that Marcus Devereaux sent you up here to scare me into giving them up. Probably promised you a bonus if you brought me back to New Orleans where he could deal with me quietly." "That's a serious accusation," Garvey said, but his voice had lost its edge. "And what you're doing is a serious crime, using legal process to cover up illegal activity, harassment, possibly kidnapping, if you'd managed to take me by force." Alara took a step forward. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to ride back down that mountain and tell Marcus that I'm staying right here. Tell him the documents stay safe as long as I stay safe. Tell him if he sends anyone else after me, lawyer, hired gun, doesn't matter. Those records go public immediately." "You can't." "I can, and I will." Her voice was iron now. "I'm done running, done being afraid, done letting him control my life from 1,000 miles away. This is where I make my stand. Garvey looked at the other men, clearly calculating his options. Whatever he'd expected from this confrontation, it wasn't this. Not a woman who stood her ground, who had leverage, who wasn't afraid to use it. Brennan, he said finally, a word outside. The constable followed him out, along with the others. Through the window, Caleb could see them arguing, their voices rising and falling, but the words lost in the wind. Alara stood rigid beside him, and when he glanced at her, he could see she was shaking, not with fear now, but with adrenaline, with the aftermath of confrontation. Those documents, Caleb said quietly. They real? Every word. And they're really safe? Hidden somewhere? Yes. You want to tell me where? She looked at him, and there was something raw in her eyes. Do you really want to know? Because if you know, you become part of this. You become someone he might target. Caleb thought about this, about the choice he was making. Then he said, I'm already part of this. Been part of it since I took you home with that sack over your head. That was different. That was the same thing as this, standing between you and people who want to hurt you. He shifted his rifle, kept his eyes on the men outside. So yeah, I want to know, because if something happens to you, somebody needs to make sure those documents get where they need to go. Alara was quiet for a long moment. Then, there's a postal clerk in Sacramento, name's Harrison Webb. I sent him a package before I left New Orleans, paid him 2 years in advance to hold it. Told him if I don't check in every 3 months with a specific code phrase, he sends the package to the marshal. Smart. Paranoid, more like. But it's kept me alive this long. Outside, the argument seemed to be concluding. Garvey was gesturing angrily, but Brennan was shaking his head. Finally, the lawyer threw up his hands and stalked toward his horse. Brennan came back to the door alone. He looked tired, older than he had when he arrived. Miss Vance, he said, Mr. Garvey is withdrawing his complaint. Says there's been a misunderstanding. The warrant's being voided. Just like that? Caleb asked. Just like that. Brennan wouldn't meet his eyes. For what it's worth, I apologize. Didn't know the full situation. Wouldn't have come if I'd known. You came because Jasper told you to. It wasn't a question. Came because there was a warrant. But yeah, Jasper and some others, they've been pushing for this since word got out about you taking in the mail order woman. He looked at Alara. Be careful, ma'am. You made an enemy in Garvey, and through him, maybe enemies you don't even know about yet. I've survived worse enemies than Edward Garvey. I believe you have. Brennan put his hat back on. Rourke, you got yourself a hell of a woman there. Don't let her go. Wasn't planning on it. They watched the men mount up and ride off into the darkness, 5 shadows disappearing into the white landscape. When the sound of hoofbeats finally faded, Alara let out a breath that seemed to come from her soul. It's not over, she said. Marcus won't give up this easily. No, Caleb agreed, but he knows you're not helpless now, knows you've got protection and leverage. That counts for something. Does it? She turned to face him, and her eyes were wet with unshed tears. Because all I can think is that I've brought this down on you, put you in danger, made you a target. I made myself a target when I chose you over their warnings. He set down his rifle, moved close enough that he could see the pulse beating in her throat. And I'd make the same choice again. Right now. Without hesitation. Why? It came out as a whisper. Why would you stand up for me like that? Caleb reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his scarred hand, thumb brushing the thin scar at the corner of her mouth. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being the mail-order bride I sent for and became the woman I couldn't imagine living without. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. Alara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. I'm going to break your heart, she whispered. I break everything I touch. Then we'll be broken together. She opened her eyes, looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Then, moving slowly enough that he could stop her if he wanted, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was salt-tinged from her tears, hesitant and fierce all at once. Caleb's hand slid into her hair, pulling her closer, and for a moment the cabin, the mountain, the danger, all of it fell away. There was only this, only them. When they finally broke apart, Alara rested her forehead against his chest. I don't know how to do this. Don't know how to be with someone without it being a transaction. Then we'll figure it out together. No transactions, no debts. Just two people trying to survive winter and maybe finding something worth surviving for. She looked up at him, and there was something new in her eyes. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the possibility of hope. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Everything else is what makes it complicated. Alara laughed, shaky but genuine. Well, at least we've established I come with significant complications. I noticed. They stood there in the quiet cabin, holding each other while the fire burned low and the temperature dropped toward freezing. Outside, fresh snow was starting to fall, covering the tracks the riders had left, erasing all evidence they'd been there. But Caleb knew better. Some things couldn't be erased with snow. The confrontation tonight had changed everything. Marcus Devereaux knew where Alara was now. Knew she wasn't alone. Knew she had documents that could destroy him. A man like that wouldn't just walk away. The real battle was still coming. But tonight, with Alara warm in his arms and the mountain quiet around them, Caleb let himself believe they might have a chance. That broken people could build something whole. That the unwanted could become indispensable. That sometimes, just sometimes, choosing to stand and fight was better than running alone into the dark. They woke to the sound of someone pounding on the door before dawn had fully broken. Caleb was on his feet before he was fully conscious, rifle in hand, while above him Alara scrambled down from the loft. "Rourke, open up! It's Brennan!" The constable's voice carried an urgency that made Caleb's gut clench. He checked the load on his rifle before lifting the latch, keeping the weapon ready as the door swung open. Brennan stood there alone, his horse blowing hard behind him like he'd ridden fast. His face was grim in the pale light. "They're coming back," he said without preamble. "Garvey and at least 6 men, maybe more, armed, and they're not interested in warrants this time." Alara appeared at Caleb's shoulder. "When?" "By my guess, they're half a day behind me. I rode through the night to warn you." Brennan's eyes were bloodshot, exhausted. "Miss Vance, I don't know what you've got on Devereaux, but it must be damning as hell. Garvey went down to Cedar Valley yesterday and came back with hired guns, real ones, the kind who don't ask questions." "How many?" Caleb asked. "Counted 8, including Garvey. Could be more I didn't see." Brennan shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Rourke, you need to get her out of here. Head deeper into the mountains, or better yet, down to Sacramento where there's actual law. These men, they're not coming to talk." "I'm not running." Alara's voice was flat, final. "Ma'am, with respect, you don't have a choice. These aren't men who'll listen to reason." "I've been listening to that advice my whole life. Run, hide, keep your head down, don't make trouble. I'm done with it." She looked at Caleb. "We make our stand here." "Against 8 armed men?" Brennan shook his head. "That's suicide." "Maybe." Caleb was already calculating. Angles of approach, defensive positions, how long they could hold out. "But she's right. Running just means they catch us in open country where we've got no cover and no supplies. At least here we've got walls and high ground." "You're both insane." "Probably." Caleb moved to the window, scanned the tree line. Nothing yet, but Brennan wouldn't lie about something like this. "You planning to help, or just warn us?" Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, deep and weary. "I'll help. Not because I think this is smart, but because what Garvey's doing is illegal as hell, and I'm tired of being used by rich men who think they're above the law." "Thank you," Alara said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. We might all be dead by tomorrow." He looked at Caleb. "What's your plan?" "Same thing that works against any siege. Make it cost them more than they're willing to pay." Caleb moved to the corner where he kept his ammunition, started checking supplies. "How's your shooting?" "Good enough." "Better be better than good enough. Alara, get dressed warm and pack a bag. Food, water, warm clothes. Keep it light in case we do have to run." "I'm not running." "Pack it anyway. If things go wrong, I want options." He turned to Brennan. "Your horse needs rest. Put him in the barn, then help me fortify the windows. We've got maybe 6 hours if they're moving cautious, less if they're pushing hard." The next hours passed in frantic preparation. They barricaded the windows with furniture and spare timber, leaving narrow gaps to shoot through. Caleb showed Brennan and Alara the fields of fire from each position, explained how to reload quickly in low light. They moved ammunition to strategic locations around the cabin, filled every container they had with water in case the siege lasted. "This is really happening," Alara said at one point. She was loading cartridges with steady hands, but her voice was tight. "We're actually going to fight. Unless you've changed your mind about running." Caleb was hammering wooden braces against the doorframe, reinforcing it. "No, but I keep thinking, this is my fault. These men are coming because of me. If I'd just stayed in New Orleans, if you'd stayed in New Orleans, you'd either be dead or still trapped." Brennan interrupted from where he was working on a window. "Don't do that to yourself. You made the choice any sane person would make. What comes after isn't on you." "Brennan's right," Caleb said. "This is on Devereaux, on Garvey, on every man who thinks he can take what he wants by force, not on you." Alara nodded, but her hands had started shaking. She set down the cartridges carefully, pressed her palms flat against the table. "I'm scared." "Good." Caleb moved to her side. "Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. It's only a problem if it stops you from acting." "And if it does? If when the moment comes, I freeze?" He took her hand, squeezed it once. "Then Brennan and I will handle it. But I don't think you will. I've seen you face down a lawyer and 5 armed men without flinching. You'll do what needs doing." She met his eyes, searched them for reassurance or lies or whatever it was she needed to find. Then she nodded, picked up the cartridges again, went back to loading. By midday, the cabin was as fortified as they could make it. Caleb stood at the window, scanning the approaches. The snow had stopped during the night, leaving the world crystalline and bright. Too bright. Anyone approaching would be visible from far off, but they'd also be backlit against the snow, making for difficult shooting. "Tell me about these documents," Brennan said. He was cleaning his rifle, methodical and careful. "What's in them that's worth killing over?" Alara hesitated, then spoke. "Evidence of treason. During the war, Marcus Devereaux was selling supplies to both sides, Union and Confederate. He made a fortune while soldiers starved. There are also records of bribes, fraud, contracts obtained through blackmail. Enough to hang him, or at least put him in prison for the rest of his life. And you have proof of all this? Copies of his ledgers, letters he wrote, bank transfers with his signature, 3 years' worth." She looked at her hands. "I kept them because I knew one day I'd need leverage. Knew he wouldn't let me go without insurance." "Smart." Brennan said it with grudging respect. "Risky, but smart." "Risky is putting it mildly. If he'd found out before I left—" She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The afternoon wore on, tension building with each hour. They took turns watching the approaches, eating in shifts, trying to conserve their energy for what was coming. Caleb found himself watching Alara when she wasn't looking. The set of her jaw, the way her hand would drift to touch the rifle she'd propped beside her, the quick nervous energy in her movements. "She's strong," Brennan said quietly. He'd caught Caleb staring. "Stronger than she knows." "I know. You care about her. More than you expected to." It wasn't a question. Caleb didn't answer it anyway, just kept his eyes on the tree line. "For what it's worth," Brennan continued, "I think you did right. Taking her in. Standing up for her. Most men wouldn't have. Most men are cowards. Or practical. There's a difference. Not much of one." They fell silent as Alara joined them at the window. The sun was dropping toward the western peaks now, painting the snow in shades of amber and rose. Beautiful and deadly cold. Night would come fast at this altitude, and with it, temperatures that could kill. "They'll come at dawn," Caleb said. "Standard tactic. Catch us when we're cold and tired, when the sun's in our eyes." "How do you know?" Alara asked. "Because that's what I'd do." He turned from the window. "Which means we sleep now, in shifts. Alara, you take first rest. Brennan and I will watch. You need to be sharp tomorrow, more than us. You're the one they really want." He said it gently but firmly. "Get some rest." She looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. She climbed up to the loft without another word, and soon Caleb could hear the creaking of boards as she settled. "You really think they'll wait until dawn?" Brennan asked. "No, I think they'll scout tonight, get their positions, maybe try to burn us out or force a surrender. But the real attack will come with the light. Caleb loaded his rifle, checked the action. Question is whether we can hold them off long enough for them to decide it's not worth it. And if we can't, then we make them pay for every inch. The night came down like a hammer. They kept the fire low, just enough for warmth, but not enough to make them visible targets through the windows. Every hour, one of them would do a circuit of the cabin, checking the barricades, listening for movement outside. Around midnight, Caleb heard it, the soft crunch of snow under careful feet. He held up a hand, signaling Brennan to silence, then moved to the window facing north. In the starlight, he could see shapes moving through the trees. 3 men, maybe 4, spreading out to surround the cabin. "They're here," he whispered. Brennan moved to the opposite window. "Got 2 more on this side." Above them, Alara stirred. "What's happening?" "Scouts. Stay down and stay quiet." For long minutes, they watched the men position themselves. They were professionals, Caleb could tell, moving with purpose, setting up overlapping fields of fire, creating a perimeter that would be hard to break. When they were done, they simply waited, dark shapes against darker trees. Then a voice called out, loud in the frozen air. "Alara Vance, this is Edward Garvey. I'm here representing Marcus Devereaux. Send out the woman and the documents, and the rest of you walk away alive." Caleb looked up at Alara. She'd climbed down from the loft, rifle in hand, her face pale but determined. "Don't answer," he said. "I have to. This is my fight." "It's our fight now." She moved to the window, called out, "The documents are safe, Garvey. If anything happens to me, they go public. You kill me, you destroy everything Devereaux's built." "We'll take that chance." Garvey's voice was cold. "You've got until dawn to reconsider. After that, we come in shooting." "Then you better bring more men." Laughter echoed through the darkness. "Brave words from a cornered woman. But dawn's coming, Miss Vance, and with it, your reckoning." Silence fell again, thick and oppressive. Alara moved away from the window, her hands shaking now that the bravado had faded. "I shouldn't have said that," she whispered. "I just made it worse." "You showed them you're not scared. That counts for something." Caleb guided her to a chair. "Now we wait. They won't try anything until light. Too much risk of shooting each other in the dark. So we just sit here, waiting to die? We sit here making them think about whether this is worth it, about what Devereaux promised them versus what it's going to cost." He knelt in front of her, made her look at him. "Listen to me. When the shooting starts, you focus on staying alive. You shoot if you have a clear target, but mostly you stay low and reload for us. You understand?" "I understand. And if I tell you to run, if there's any chance at all, you take it. You go to Sacramento, find this Harrison Webb, and you make sure those documents get where they need to go. I'm not leaving you. You will if I say so." His grip on her hands tightened. "Promise me, Alara. Promise if it comes to that, you'll run." She stared at him for a long moment, tears tracking down her cheeks. Then quietly, "I promise." He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm glad it was you," he said. "The woman they sent. I'm glad it was you. Even though I brought all this down on you? Especially because of that. Because it means I got to know what it's like to fight for something that matters. Someone that matters." Dawn came too soon and too slow all at once. The sky lightened by degrees, turning from black to gray to pale rose. Caleb stood at the window, rifle ready, watching the tree line for movement. Beside him, Brennan was doing the same on the other side of the cabin. Alara moved between them, checking ammunition, keeping water and food within reach. The sun broke over the eastern peaks, flooding the clearing with golden light. That's when they came. They didn't rush, didn't charge screaming. They moved with military precision. 3 men from the north, 2 from the south, 1 staying back with a rifle for covering fire. They used the trees for cover, advancing in short bursts, making themselves hard targets. "Hold your fire," Caleb said. "Let them get close. Make every shot count." The men were 50 yards out when he finally squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, and one of the advancing figures went down. Beside him, Brennan fired, then fired again. Another man stumbled, clutching his leg. Then the return fire came like thunder. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, punched through shutters, sent splinters flying. Alara ducked low, hands over her head, as the world exploded into noise and smoke. "Alara, reload!" Caleb thrust his empty rifle toward her, grabbed the loaded one she offered. He sighted on a man trying to flank them from the south, fired, missed. The man dove behind a fallen log. The battle dissolved into chaos. Smoke, noise, the acrid smell of gunpowder, the splintering of wood as bullets found their marks. Caleb lost track of time, operating on instinct and training, shooting and reloading in an endless rhythm. Then Brennan cried out. Caleb turned to see the constable stumbling back from the window, blood spreading across his shoulder. "I'm hit," Brennan gasped. "Not bad, but—" "Alara, take his position." Caleb kept firing, couldn't afford to stop. "Brennan, bind that wound." She grabbed Brennan's rifle, moved to the window with hands that shook but held steady enough. She aimed, fired, the recoil nearly knocking her backward. Missed, aimed again, squeezed the trigger. This time, someone screamed in the trees. "Good," Caleb shouted. "Keep them pinned." The firing slowed, became sporadic. Caleb risked a glance through the smoke and saw bodies in the snow, 2, maybe 3 men down. The others had pulled back, reassessing their attack. "Garvey!" Caleb called out. "You're losing men. How many more are you willing to sacrifice?" No answer. Just the sound of wind through the trees and labored breathing inside the cabin. "They're regrouping," Brennan said. He'd bound his shoulder with a torn shirt, his face pale but determined. "That wasn't their main assault, just testing our defenses." "I know." Caleb reloaded methodically, his hands automatic. "Alara, you all right?" "I killed someone." Her voice was distant, shocked. "I aimed and fired and someone screamed and—" "Don't think about it now. Think about it later, when we're alive to think." He moved to her side, checked her rifle. "You did good. You're doing exactly what you need to." She nodded numbly, turned back to the window. The second assault came an hour later, harder and more coordinated. They hit from 3 sides simultaneously, using covering fire to advance. Caleb abandoned the window, moved to the door as someone started pounding on it with what sounded like a log. "They're trying to breach," he shouted. The door shuddered under the impact, the reinforced frame holding but barely. Caleb aimed at chest height, fired through the wood. Someone screamed, and the pounding stopped. Then the window on the south side exploded inward. A man rolled through, gun raised, and Brennan shot him before he could fully stand. The body fell across the window frame, blocking it. "They're desperate," Brennan yelled. "We're hurting them bad." But they were getting hurt too. Caleb's left arm was bleeding from a splinter wound. Brennan's shoulder was still seeping, and Alara had a cut on her face from flying glass. They were running low on ammunition, on energy, on time. The third assault came at noon. By then, Caleb knew they were in trouble. The men outside had found their rhythm, were coordinating better, covering each other's advances. A bullet grazed Caleb's side, hot and burning. Another shattered the water pitcher, soaking the floor. "We can't hold!" Brennan shouted over the gunfire. "Rourke, we need to—" The door exploded inward, the frame finally giving way. 2 men rushed through, and everything became close-quarters chaos. Caleb swung his rifle like a club, connected with someone's jaw. Brennan grappled with another man, both of them going down hard. Then Alara was there, her rifle leveled at a third man climbing through the broken door. She fired point blank, and the man dropped. For a moment, everything stopped. The men outside ceased firing. The ones inside were dead or dying. In the sudden silence, Caleb could hear his own heartbeat, could taste blood and smoke. "Enough!" Garvey's voice, ragged and furious. "Enough! Cease fire!" Slowly, the shooting stopped. Caleb moved to the shattered doorway, rifle ready, and looked out at the carnage. 4 men were down in the snow, not moving. 2 more were wounded, being dragged back by their companions. "You've made your point," Garvey called. He was visible now, standing beside a tree, his expensive coat torn and dirty. "But this doesn't end until I get what I came for. Then it doesn't end!" Alara pushed past Caleb, stood in the doorway despite his attempt to pull her back. "Because I'm not giving you anything. You hear me? I'm done being afraid of Marcus Devereaux. I'm done running. You're going to die here. Maybe. But those documents still go public. Every crime, every bribe, every act of treason, it all comes out. So you can kill me, but you can't stop what I've put in motion." Garvey stared at her, and Caleb could see the calculation in his eyes. The lawyer was weighing his options. Continue the assault and maybe win, but at what cost? Return to Devereaux empty-handed? Try to bargain? "There's another option," Elara said, her voice carrying across the bloody snow. "You walk away. Tell Devereaux the woman got away or died in the fight, or whatever story lets you save face. And in return, I give you something more valuable than my death." "What could you possibly offer?" "A truce. The documents stay hidden as long as I'm left alone. Devereaux goes back to his business, I stay in these mountains, and we never see each other again." She paused. "Or you can keep fighting, lose more men, and achieve nothing. Your choice." The clearing was silent except for the moaning of wounded men. Garvey looked at his remaining fighters, 4 men, 2 of them injured, all of them looking at him with something between fear and mutiny in their eyes. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" he asked finally. "Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Because I'm tired. Because I just want to live in peace." Elara's voice cracked slightly. "I'm not your enemy, Garvey. Marcus Devereaux is your enemy. He sent you up here to die for his secrets. How many more men do you want to sacrifice for him?" Garvey was quiet for a long time. Then he turned to his men, had a brief, heated discussion. One of them, wounded and angry, shook his head violently, but the others were nodding, eager to leave. Finally, Garvey turned back. "You've got your truce, Miss Vance, but if those documents ever surface, they won't. Not unless someone forces my hand." She stood straighter. "You tell Marcus that I kept my end of the bargain. I expect him to keep his. And if he doesn't? Then you'll read about his crimes in every newspaper from here to Washington." She smiled cold and hard. "Your choice. His choice. But the offer won't come again." Garvey nodded slowly. "We'll take our wounded and leave, but if we ever cross paths again, we won't." Elara's voice was final. "I'm done with your world, done with New Orleans and everything in it. This is where I make my home." They watched as the men gathered their dead and wounded, as they mounted horses that had been hidden deeper in the trees as they rode away down the mountain road. Caleb kept his rifle ready until the last rider disappeared from view. Then he lowered it and turned to Elara. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Before he could speak, her legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees in the doorway. "I killed people," she whispered. "I stood there and killed people." Caleb knelt beside her, pulled her against his chest. "You survived. That's all that matters." "Is it?" She looked up at him, eyes hollow. "Because I don't feel like I survived. I feel like something broke inside me, and I'll never be whole again." "Then we'll be broken together." He held her tighter. "And maybe that's enough." Brennan limped over, his face gray with pain but alive. "We need to tend these wounds before infection sets in, and we need to repair this cabin before we freeze to death." He looked at the shattered door, the broken windows, the blood on the floor. "It's going to be a long night." It was a long night, and many long nights after. They cleaned wounds and wrapped them as best they could. They patched the door and windows with canvas and spare wood. They hauled bodies out of the cabin and covered them with snow until the ground thawed enough for burial. Brennan stayed for 3 days, helping with repairs, making sure infection didn't set in. Then he rode back down to the settlement, promising to spread word that Elara Vance was under Caleb Rourke's protection, that anyone who came looking for her would answer to him. And then they were alone again. Just Caleb and Elara and the mountain and the silence. Except the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken things, of trauma that needed time to heal, of a bond forged in blood and fear. "I don't know who I am anymore," Elara said one evening. They were sitting by the rebuilt fire, watching flames dance across patched walls. "I used to be someone who ran. That's who I was. The woman who survived by running, but now you're someone who stands." Caleb reached for her hand. "Someone who fought back, someone who won." "Did I win?" "Because it doesn't feel like winning. You're alive, you're free. Devereaux's men are gone. That's winning." She leaned against him, exhausted beyond measure. What happens now? Now we heal. We rebuild. We figure out how to live with what we did. He paused. And we decide if what we have is worth building on. Alara was quiet for a long moment. Then, I think it might be. Worth building on. If you're still willing. I'm willing. He kissed the top of her head. I'm willing to try. Outside, fresh snow was falling, covering the bloodstains, erasing the evidence of battle. Winter was closing in again, but this time it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like shelter. Spring came late that year, reluctant and tentative, like it wasn't sure the mountain would accept it. The snow retreated by inches, revealing brown grass and mud and the graves they'd dug when the ground finally thawed enough. 4 mounds under crude wooden crosses, men whose names they'd never learned, buried on the north side of the clearing where the pines grew thick. Alara stood looking at those graves on the first truly warm day of April, her arms wrapped around herself despite the sunshine. Caleb found her there, silent and still as the markers themselves. You come out here a lot, he said quietly. Someone should remember them, even if we don't know who they were. She touched one of the crosses, traced the rough wood with her fingertips. They came here because someone paid them, died because someone else's greed was more important than their lives. They came here to kill you. I know. Her voice was flat. Doesn't mean they deserve to die. Doesn't mean I don't see their faces when I close my eyes. Caleb moved beside her, looked at the graves. You want to talk about it? What's there to talk about? I killed people. People who probably had families, lives, reasons for doing what they did. And now they're in the ground because I wouldn't... She stopped, swallowed hard. Because I couldn't keep running. You want to know what I see when I look at these graves? Caleb waited until she met his eyes. I see men who made choices, who chose money over morality, who chose to follow orders that meant killing a woman for the crime of wanting to be free. You didn't put them here, Alara. Their choices did. That's easy to say, harder to believe. I know. He took her hand. But you believing it or not doesn't change the truth of it. They stood there in the warming sunlight, holding hands over the graves of strangers, until Alara finally turned away. I need to go to Sacramento. The words hit Caleb like cold water. Why? Because I need to know, need to see for myself that those documents are still safe, that Harrison Webb hasn't sold me out or lost them or... She shook her head. I need to know this is really over. It's over. Garvey rode away. Devereaux hasn't sent anyone else. Not yet. But that doesn't mean he won't. Doesn't mean he's forgotten. She looked back toward the cabin, at the patched walls and rebuilt door that still showed scars from the battle. I can't live like this, Caleb. Can't spend every day waiting for the other boot to drop. I need to end this for real. How? By confronting Devereaux? By giving those documents to the federal marshal. By making sure they can never be used against me, never be a target on my back. She squeezed his hand. By finishing what I started when I ran. Caleb was quiet, working through the implications. If you do that, Devereaux goes to prison. Maybe gets hanged for treason. His people won't just let that happen. They'll come after me whether I'm hiding or not. At least this way, I take away his power first. She turned to face him fully. I'm tired of being afraid, tired of looking over my shoulder. I want to live, Caleb, really live, and I can't do that with this hanging over me. Then we go together. I can't ask you to... You're not asking, I'm telling. He said it firmly. You think I'm letting you ride into danger alone, after everything? We're in this together, remember? Something softened in her face, the hard edges she'd been carrying since the battle smoothing out. Together. Yeah, I remember. They left 3 days later, taking both horses and enough supplies for the week-long journey. Brennan agreed to check on the cabin while they were gone, to make sure no one came sniffing around in their absence. At the settlement, people stared, but no one tried to stop them. Word had spread about the battle, about the bodies buried up the mountain, about the woman who'd stood her ground against hired guns. Alara Vance wasn't unwanted anymore. She was dangerous. That bought a different kind of respect. The road down to Sacramento was muddy with snowmelt, treacherous in places where the winter had shifted the ground. They traveled carefully, camping at night under the stars, speaking quietly around small fires about everything and nothing. about the future they might build, about what came after vengeance and survival. "I've been thinking," Alara said one evening. They were camped beside a creek, the sound of running water mixing with the crackle of burning wood. "About what I want. When this is over." "What do you want?" She stared into the flames, considering. "Something useful, something that matters. I spent so many years just surviving, running from one bad situation to the next. I want to do more than survive now." "Like what?" "Teach, maybe. There's kids at the settlement with no school, no education beyond what their parents can give them. I could—" She stopped, suddenly uncertain. "Is that foolish? Thinking I could teach anyone anything? You taught me to cook without burning everything. Taught me that silence doesn't have to be empty." Caleb poked at the fire. "Seems like you'd make a good teacher." "You have to say that. You're—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Whatever we are to each other. What are we?" The question hung between them. Alara looked at him across the firelight, her face half in shadow. "I don't know," she said finally. "I've never had something like this before. Something that wasn't transactional, wasn't based on what I could give or what someone could take. I don't know what to call it." "Does it need a name?" "Eventually, if we're going to build a life together, it needs—" She stopped again, frustrated with her inability to articulate what she felt. "I love you. I think— I'm not sure I know what love is supposed to feel like, but when I'm with you, I feel like maybe I could figure it out." Caleb set down the stick he'd been using to tend the fire, moved around to sit beside her. "I love you too. Definitely. Not I think. I know." "How?" "Because when Garvey's men were breaking down that door, all I could think was that I needed you to survive. Not me. You. Because the world needed you in it more than it needed me." He took her hand. "And because every morning I wake up and you're there, and the silence doesn't have teeth anymore." Alara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "We're a mess, aren't we? Two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole." "Yeah, but we're our mess. That counts for something." They reached Sacramento on a Wednesday afternoon, the city busy with commerce and noise and more people than Alara had seen in months. She went rigid on her horse, overwhelmed by the crush of humanity after so long in isolation. "Easy," Caleb said quietly. "Just breathe. We'll find Webb, do what we came to do, and get out." The postal office was on Main Street, a sturdy brick building that smelled of paper and ink and sealing wax. Harrison Webb turned out to be a thin man in his 50s, with wire spectacles and nervous hands. When Alara introduced herself, his face went pale. "Miss Vance, I wasn't sure you'd ever come." He glanced around the busy office, lowered his voice. "The package is safe. I've kept it exactly as you instructed, but I need you to know there have been inquiries." "What kind of inquiries?" "Men asking if I've received anything from New Orleans, if I know an Alara Vance. I told them nothing, but—" He wrung his hands. They were persistent, threatening. "When was this?" 2 months ago. Haven't seen them since, but I've been worried they might come back." Alara exchanged a glance with Caleb. 2 months ago would have been right before Garvey came to the mountain. Devereaux had been thorough, covering all his bases. "I need the package, Mr. Webb, and I need to know where the federal marshal's office is." Webb's eyes went wide. "You're turning them in? The documents? I'm ending this. One way or another." He led them to a back room, unlocked a safe with shaking hands, and withdrew a thick envelope sealed with wax. Alara took it, felt the weight of it, the power it represented. 3 years of evidence, 3 years of insurance, about to become 3 years of justice. "The marshal's office is on K Street," Webb said. "But Miss Vance, are you sure about this? Once those documents are public, there's no taking it back. Devereaux will face consequences for his actions, for the first time in his life." She tucked the envelope inside her coat. "Thank you, Mr. Webb, for keeping your word, for protecting these when you didn't have to. I'm a postal clerk. Keeping people's correspondence safe is what I do." But he smiled, small and proud. "Good luck, Miss Vance. I hope you find what you're looking for." The marshal's office was less impressive than Alara had imagined. Just a few rooms with barred windows and wanted posters on the walls. The deputy at the desk looked up when they entered, his expression bored until he saw the determination on Alara's face. Help you folks? I need to see Marshal Hendricks. It's urgent. Marshal's busy. You can leave a... I have evidence of treason, fraud, and corruption involving a shipping magnate in New Orleans. Alara set the envelope on the desk. Either the marshal sees me now, or I take this to the newspaper and make it very public that you turned away a witness. The deputy's boredom evaporated. He stood quickly, knocked on an inner door, spoke in low, urgent tones. A moment later, a man emerged, tall, gray-haired, with eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed. I'm Marshal Hendricks. You've got evidence of crimes? Federal crimes. Treason during the war, ongoing fraud, bribery of government officials. Alara pushed the envelope toward him. Everything's in there. Names, dates, amounts, signatures, 3 years of detailed records. Hendricks opened the envelope, began reading. His expression shifted from skepticism to interest to grim satisfaction. When he finally looked up, there was respect in his eyes. Where did you get this? From the man committing the crimes. I worked in his household, kept copies of his ledgers, his correspondence, his bank records. She paused. His name is Marcus Devereaux. He owns Devereaux Shipping in New Orleans. I know who he is. Big man, well-connected. Hendricks set the papers down carefully. Miss Vance. Alara Vance. Miss Vance, you understand what this means? If these documents are genuine, Devereaux will be arrested, tried, likely imprisoned or hanged. He's not going to take that lying down. He's already tried to kill me once, sent hired guns to a mountain cabin, killed 3 men trying to get to me. She gestured to Caleb. This is Caleb Rourke. He was there. Can confirm everything. It's true, Caleb said. All of it. Hendricks was quiet for a long moment, studying them both. Then he called to the deputy. Morgan, send telegrams to New Orleans and Washington. Let them know we're opening an investigation into Devereaux Shipping, and get statements from these 2. Everything they know, everything they've witnessed. Yes, sir. Miss Vance. Hendricks looked at her seriously. You've just made a very powerful enemy. You understand that? I already had that enemy. Now I'm fighting back. Good. He smiled, thin but genuine. I like people who fight back. Makes my job easier. We'll need you to stay in Sacramento for a few days, give depositions, answer questions. After that, he shrugged. After that, you'll need to be careful. Even with Devereaux in custody, he'll have associates, people loyal to him. I know, but I'm done running, done hiding. She stood straighter. I'm taking my life back. They spent 4 days in Sacramento, telling their story to lawyers and investigators, signing statements, identifying signatures on documents. The evidence was damning. Even the skeptical prosecutors had to admit that. Word came back from New Orleans that Marcus Devereaux had been arrested, his assets frozen, his shipping empire crumbling under the weight of federal investigation. He's finished, the prosecutor told Alara on the 4th day. Even if he beats the treason charges, the fraud alone will put him away for decades. You did it, Miss Vance. You won. But Alara didn't feel like she'd won. She felt exhausted, wrung out, empty of everything except the desire to go home. Home to the mountain, home to the cabin with its patched walls and rebuilt door. Home to the life she was learning to build. They left Sacramento on a bright morning, riding north toward the mountains with the sun at their backs. Alara was quiet for the first few hours, lost in thought. You all right? Caleb asked. I think so. It's really over. He can't hurt me anymore, can't control me or threaten me or... Her voice broke slightly. I'm free, actually free, and I don't know what to do with that. You live. That's what you do with it. You live the life you choose, not the one forced on you. And what life do I choose? Caleb pulled his horse closer to hers, reached across to take her hand. Whatever life makes you happy. Could be teaching those kids at the settlement like you mentioned. Could be something else entirely. Long as it's yours. Alara looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the man who'd taken a chance on an unwanted woman with a sack over her head, the man who'd stood beside her when armed men came calling, the man who'd ridden with her into danger without hesitation. I choose you, she said. Whatever life I build, I choose to build it with you, if you'll have me. Already had you. Since that first day, I think. Just took us a while to figure it out. Caleb Rourke, are you proposing to me? Depends. Are you accepting? She laughed, genuine and free, the sound carrying across the road. Yeah, I'm accepting, even though we're both disasters, even though neither of us has any idea what we're doing. Especially because of that, he grinned. We'll figure it out together, make it up as we go. They reached the settlement by evening, tired but content. News of Devereaux's arrest had reached even this remote corner of the mountains, carried by traders and travelers. People looked at Alara differently now, not as damaged goods or trouble, but as someone who'd taken down a powerful man through sheer determination. Brennan met them at the trading post, relief written across his face. Heard you went to Sacramento. Heard about Devereaux, too. Hell of a thing. It's done, Alara said simply. Really done. Good. You deserve peace. He paused. Speaking of which, there's been talk at the settlement about starting a school. Some of the families, they've got kids who need education, and I'll do it, Alara interrupted. If you're asking, I'll teach them. Just like that? Just like that. I've got nothing but time now. Might as well spend it doing something worthwhile. Brennan smiled. I'll let the others know. We can fix up the old storage building behind the trading post, turn it into a classroom. Won't be fancy, but it'll be perfect, Alara assured him. They stayed at the settlement that night, celebrating quietly with Brennan and a few others who'd come to respect what Alara and Caleb had survived. But when morning came, they were eager to get back to the cabin, to the quiet and isolation that had become home. The ride up the mountain felt different this time, lighter somehow, like they'd shed weight they didn't know they were carrying. When the cabin came into view, Alara felt something in her chest loosen, finally, completely. Welcome home, Caleb said. Home. She tested the word, found it fit. Yeah. Home. They spent the next weeks repairing the last damage from the battle, improving the cabin, preparing for the summer months. Alara started traveling down to the settlement twice a week to teach. Simple lessons at first, reading and writing and arithmetic. But the children were eager, and she found she had a gift for making learning feel less like work and more like discovery. You're good at this, Caleb observed one evening. She'd come back from the settlement full of stories about her students, animated in a way he'd never seen before. I am, aren't I? She sounded surprised by her own competence. One of the girls, Mary Chen, Samuel's niece, she's brilliant. Give her a year and she'll be reading better than most adults at the settlement. You sound proud. I am proud. Of them. Of what we're building. She moved to stand beside him at the window, looking out at the darkening mountains. I never thought I'd have this. A purpose that wasn't just survival. People who depend on me for something other than... She stopped, but he understood what she couldn't say. You're more than what was done to you, Caleb said quietly. Always were. Just took you a while to see it. Summer deepened, turning the mountain green and lush. They married in August, a simple ceremony at the cabin with Brennan officiating and a handful of settlers bearing witness. Alara wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Caleb had bought at the trading post, deep blue like the mountain sky. When they spoke their vows, plain, honest words about standing together through whatever came, she cried, but not from sadness. I, Alara Vance, take you, Caleb Rourke, to be my husband, to stand with in good times and bad, to build a life with that's ours and no one else's. I, Caleb Rourke, take you, Alara Vance, to be my wife, to protect and respect, to choose every day not because I have to, but because I want to. They kissed to applause from the small gathering, and Alara thought about the woman she'd been, hooded, labeled unfit, discarded. That woman felt like someone else now, someone she'd been but no longer was. By fall, the school had outgrown the storage building. The settlement came together to build a proper schoolhouse, small but sturdy, with windows that let in light and a stove that would keep the children warm through winter. Alara stood watching them raise the walls and felt something she'd never expected to feel: pride, belonging, purpose. You've changed this place, Caleb said. He'd come to help with the construction, was taking a break in the afternoon sun. I've just taught a few children to read. You've done more than that, given them opportunities they wouldn't have had, given their parents hope that their kids might have better lives. He wiped sweat from his forehead. That's not nothing, Alara. She looked at him, this man who'd chosen her when no one else would, who'd fought for her, stood by her, loved her when she didn't know how to love herself. "None of this would exist without you," she said. "You know that, right? If you hadn't taken me in that day, if you'd listened to Jasper and all the others, then I'd still be slowly dying alone in that cabin." He pulled her close despite being sweaty and covered in sawdust. "We saved each other. That's how this works." Winter came again, but this time it didn't feel like confinement. It felt like rest, like time to prepare for the next phase of whatever they were building. Alara taught through the cold months, using slates and primers Caleb had ordered from Sacramento. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic, but also history and geography and everything else she'd learned in her years of survival. And she taught them something else, though she never spoke it aloud, that you could survive the worst and still build something good. That being unwanted didn't mean being worthless. That choosing to stand was sometimes braver than choosing to run. One evening in late February, Caleb found her sitting at the table, writing by lamplight. He moved behind her, saw she was working on letters to her students' parents, describing their progress. "You're good at this," he said. "The teaching, the writing, all of it. I like it. Feels like I'm doing something that matters." "You are." He kissed the top of her head. "You've built something here, Alara. Changed lives, including mine." She set down her pen, turned to face him. "I got a letter today, from Sacramento, from the prosecutor." Caleb tensed. "What did it say?" Devereaux was sentenced, 20 years in federal prison for fraud. The treason charges didn't stick, not enough direct evidence, but the financial crimes were undeniable. She paused. "He'll die in prison. He's too old, too soft. 20 years might as well be a death sentence." "How do you feel about that?" Alara considered the question honestly. "I feel relieved and sad. Not for him, but for all the time I spent afraid of him. All the years I could have been living instead of surviving." She stood, moved into Caleb's arms. "But mostly I feel grateful. That I got out. That I found you. That I got to build this life." "No regrets? About us? About this?" She looked around the cabin, at the life they'd made. Not a single one. Spring came early that year, eager and insistent. The snow melted fast, revealing new grass and wildflowers and possibilities. Alara expanded the school, adding lessons in practical skills, sewing, basic medicine, how to read contracts and keep accounts. Things that would help the children navigate a world that often took advantage of the uneducated. "You're making troublemakers," Jasper complained one day. He'd warmed to Alara over the years, but still had his conservative streak. "Teaching them to question, to read the fine print, that's dangerous." "That's exactly the point," Alara replied. "Dangerous to people who profit from ignorance. Good for everyone else." He laughed, shaking his head. "You're still unfit, Alara Rourke, just in different ways now." "I'll take that as a compliment." By the time summer arrived again, bringing with it heat and long days, the settlement had transformed. Children who'd been illiterate were reading newspapers. Families who'd been cheated by unscrupulous traders were checking their accounts, demanding fair prices. And at the center of it all was Alara, teaching and organizing and building something that would outlast her. "You've created a legacy," Brennan said one afternoon. They were sitting outside the schoolhouse, watching children play in the yard during their break. "These kids, they'll remember you, remember what you taught them. That'll spread, influence how they raise their own children. That's a lot of pressure. That's what happens when you matter." He smiled. "You went from unwanted to irreplaceable. That's quite a journey." Alara looked at the children, at the schoolhouse, at the mountains rising beyond. "I never wanted to be irreplaceable, just wanted to be free." "And are you free?" She thought about Marcus Devereaux in his prison cell, about the documents that had brought him down, about the woman she'd been when she arrived with a sack over her head, frightened and desperate and running from everything. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I'm free." That evening, she and Caleb sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the peaks. 3 years had passed since she'd arrived at Ashford Settlement. 3 years of fighting and building and learning to be something other than afraid. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "About how strange life is, How I ran from New Orleans expecting to hide, to disappear, to just survive in obscurity. She leaned against him. Instead, I ended up here, teaching children, making a difference, building something that matters. You regret any of it? The violence, maybe. The men who died. But the rest? She shook her head. No, I don't regret fighting for this. For us. For the life we built. Even though it was hard? Especially because it was hard. Easy things don't teach you anything. She turned to look at him. You taught me that. That standing and fighting, even when you're scared, even when the odds are terrible, that's how you become who you're meant to be. Caleb pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. 3 years ago, he'd been a man dying slowly of isolation, sending away for a bride out of desperation. Now he was a husband, a partner, part of a community that had grown because of the woman beside him. I'm glad it was you, he said finally. What? The woman they sent. The one they labeled unfit. I'm glad it was you. Wouldn't want anyone else. Alara smiled, the expression soft and genuine. Me too. Even with everything that happened, especially with everything that happened, I wouldn't change it. Not even the sack over your head? Not even that. Because if I'd arrived any other way, maybe you wouldn't have taken me. Maybe you would have listened to Jasper, sent me back, and we'd have never... She stopped, overcome. We'd have never become this. They stayed on the porch until full dark, wrapped in each other and the quiet of the mountain. Inside the cabin, a fire burned warm. Tomorrow, Alara would go down to teach her students. Caleb would work the trap lines, hunt, maintain their home. They'd live another day of the life they'd fought for. But tonight, they simply existed together, two people who'd been broken and unwanted, who'd found each other in the mountains and built something whole. Years later, when people told the story of Alara Rourke, they'd talk about the woman who took down a corrupt shipping magnate, about the teacher who brought education to the frontier, about the mail-order bride who arrived with a sack over her head and left a legacy that changed the mountain. But Alara herself remembered it differently. She remembered the man who chose her when no one else would, the winter they survived together, the battle they fought and won, the life they built from wreckage and will. She remembered being unwanted and learning that sometimes the things the world discards are exactly what someone needs. She remembered running and learning to stand. She remembered surviving and discovering how to live. And when she was old, sitting on that same porch with Caleb's hand in hers, and students she'd taught now teaching their own children, she'd think about that girl who arrived with a label pinned to her collar. Unfit. No returns. She'd smile because that girl had been right to run, right to fight, right to believe she deserved more than what the world had offered. That girl had been unfit for the life she was supposed to accept, so she'd built a different one instead. And it had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything.